Do you ever wake up one day and realize you're exhausted? Not because of what you're doing, but because of who you're trying to be. You're smiling when you're hurting, saying yes when your soul is screaming no, carrying weight that was never yours to hold. And the world applauds you for being nice while inside you're disappearing piece by piece. Let me tell you something. You are not put on this earth to abandon yourself for acceptance. Today is the day you stop shrinking, stop pleasing, and start reclaiming the real you, because your life is too powerful to be lived on mute. When you've spent your whole life trying to be the dependable one, the agreeable one, the one who never causes waves, you don't even notice the moment you start disappearing. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in tiny moments, moments so small you tell yourself they don't matter. You say yes when you want to say no. You smile when something hurts. You apologize just to keep the peace, even when you did nothing wrong. And slowly, piece by piece, you trade your power for approval. You trade your truth for acceptance. You trade your identity for comfort that never really comes. The silent cost of being a people pleaser is that nobody sees the war going on inside you. On the outside, you look calm, supportive, easygoing. But inside, there's tension, there's resentment, there's exhaustion. You feel like you're carrying the weight of everyone's expectations, and somehow you still feel like you're falling short. Because the more you try to be everything to everyone, the more invisible you become to yourself. And the hardest part is that it feels noble. It feels good to be liked, to be useful, to be the one people depend on. You convince yourself you're being strong by absorbing everything. You tell yourself you're being loving by putting yourself last. You call it kindness, but deep down it's fear. Fear of disappointing someone, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, fear that if people saw the real you, the you with boundaries, opinions, needs, they wouldn't stay. That fear is what keeps you trapped in the same pattern day after day. You wake up already calculating who you need to make happy. You already know which parts of yourself you're going to hide. And every time you do that, a little part of you gets buried under the choices you didn't make, the words you didn't say, the truth you didn't express. That's the real loss. Not the energy you give away, not the time you spend on others. It's the loss of your voice, your identity, your inner certainty about who you are and what you deserve. You weren't born this way. Somewhere along the line, you learned that the world was safer when you stayed small. You realized people reacted better when you kept your opinions quiet. Maybe you grew up in a home where love had conditions. Maybe you lived through relationships where the only way to keep the peace was to surrender your needs. Maybe you discovered early on that being agreeable was easier than being authentic, and without even noticing, that became your survival strategy. But what worked as survival will destroy you when you try to use it for living, because you can't build a meaningful life while abandoning yourself in the process. You can't keep giving and giving while pretending you don't need anything in return. You can't continue absorbing everyone's expectations without eventually losing the blueprint of who you are. There's a moment, usually quiet, usually private, where you start to feel it. That internal pull, that heaviness in your chest. You start asking questions you've avoided for years. Why am I always the one bending? Why do I feel empty after helping so much? Why do people seem to take me for granted? Why do I put myself second in every situation? And the real question underneath it all, when did I stop choosing myself? That question is a sign that something inside you is waking up. A sign that you're finally tired of carrying everything, tired of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. Tired of giving people versions of you that don't reflect the truth. That exhaustion isn't weakness, it's clarity. It's your inner voice finally saying, I'm still here, and I need you to listen. Because being nice isn't the issue. The world needs kindness. The world needs compassion. The world needs empathy. But when being nice becomes the mask you wear to avoid rejection, it stops being kindness and becomes self-betrayal. Real kindness doesn't require you to disappear. Real kindness doesn't require you to silence your needs, your boundaries, your identity. Real kindness includes you. You don't have to choose between being good and being strong. You don't have to choose between being kind and being honest. You don't have to choose between being supportive and being yourself. You're allowed to be all of it. But that starts by recognizing the cost of pleasing everyone else first. It starts by admitting the truth you've been avoiding. The more you try to keep others comfortable, the more uncomfortable you become in your own skin. And here's something powerful. People who truly care about you don't want you to break yourself just to keep them happy. They don't want your silence. They don't want your exhaustion. They don't want the version of you that's half alive. They want your truth, your energy, your passion, the real you. And the ones who get upset when you finally set boundaries are the ones who benefited from you not having any. You don't owe the world your constant sacrifice, but you do owe yourself the chance to live with honesty, strength, and self-respect. You owe yourself the right to speak up, to take space, to choose what aligns with your heart. You owe yourself the freedom you've been giving everyone else. And maybe the first step isn't dramatic. Maybe it's a single moment where you say no without explaining, or you express how you really feel instead of hiding it, or you choose what you want without guilt. That one moment becomes 2, then 3, and slowly the weight you've been carrying starts to lift. The resentment fades, the exhaustion turns into clarity. And the version of you that was buried under years of pleasing begins to rise again. You don't lose people when you stop being a people pleaser. You lose the people who were never meant for the real you. And that's the most liberating thing in the world, because you're not here to live a life of quiet apologies. You're here to live a life of truth, power, and authenticity. And it all begins when you decide that losing yourself is no longer the price you're willing to pay. There comes a moment when you have to be brutally honest with yourself and ask, am I being kind, or am I slowly sacrificing who I am just so no one gets upset with me? Because there's a massive difference between kindness and self-abandonment. And most people never realize they cross that line until they're already exhausted, drained, and wondering why they feel so disconnected from their own life. Kindness is powerful. Kindness lifts people up. Kindness is an expression of strength, but being too nice, that's something else. That's when you start betraying your own needs without even noticing it. That's when your smile becomes a mask. That's when your yes becomes a cage. Most people don't set out to erase themselves. It happens slowly. It happens when you say, it's fine, don't worry about me, even though you're hurting. It happens when you tell yourself it's not a big deal, even though it is. It happens when you let people cross lines that make you uncomfortable, because confronting them feels scarier than swallowing the discomfort. And every time you do that, your mind learns a dangerous lesson: my needs matter less. You start believing that your role is to carry everything, hold everything, and take responsibility for the comfort of everyone around you. That's not kindness. That's conditioning. Somewhere along the way, you learned that love had to be earned. You lay. Ironed, that approval was given only when you performed. You learned that keeping the peace was more important than keeping your identity intact. And maybe you didn't hear those words directly. Maybe you absorbed them through experience, reactions, tone, silence. But the lesson stuck. If I'm easy, agreeable, and always available, people will stay. But the truth is the opposite. The more you bend, the more you break. The more you break, the more you disappear. People aren't drawn to who you really are. They're drawn to the version of you that requires nothing, challenges nothing, and asks for nothing. And that version of you isn't real. That version of you is surviving, not living. Kindness requires strength. Kindness requires honesty. When you're truly kind, you don't give people a watered-down version of yourself. You give them the best version of yourself, one that is balanced, grounded, and real. But when you cross into self-sacrifice, you're no longer giving people your best. You're giving them your leftovers. You're giving them the pieces you haven't already burned out trying to keep everyone satisfied. And here's the thing people don't talk about. Being overly nice doesn't make you more loving. It makes you more resentful. You start keeping score. You start feeling unappreciated. You start telling yourself, after everything I've done, why doesn't anyone do the same for me? But they can't return what they never knew you needed. They can't support someone who never speaks up. They can't respect a boundary that was never expressed. So the cycle continues. Kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. Because every time you ignore your voice, you reinforce the belief that your voice doesn't matter. Every time you silence your truth, you reinforce the belief that your truth is inconvenient. And every time you overextend yourself for the comfort of others, you reef. Or it's the belief that your comfort is optional. And let's be honest, some people take advantage of that. Not necessarily because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to. You've trained them to believe you'll always say yes. You've trained them to believe you're always available. You've trained them to believe you'll handle it, fix it, absorb it. And people rarely challenge a system that benefits them. So the moment you start showing your needs, your boundaries, your truth, some of them won't like it. Not because you're wrong, but because you're changing a dynamic they've gotten comfortable with. That discomfort is not your problem. That discomfort is the price of becoming real again. Kindness doesn't require you to be a doormat. Kindness doesn't require you to stay quiet. Kindness doesn't require you to let someone drain the life out of you just because they're used to the version of you that didn't complain. Real kindness includes courage. Real kindness includes honesty. Real kindness includes self-respect. When you truly care about people, you don't hide who you are. You show up as who you are. You don't give them a fake yes. You give them a genuine response. You don't build relationships where you're constantly shrinking. You build relationships where everyone grows. But that starts with recognizing the difference between helping and harming yourself. It starts with understanding that your needs are not optional. Your boundaries are not barriers. They're clarity. They're guidelines for what keeps you healthy, sane, and aligned. And when you honor those, You actually become more loving, not less. You become more present, not more distant. You become more generous, not more depleted. Your kindness becomes sustainable instead of self-destructive. You don't have to swing to the other extreme. This isn't about becoming cold or selfish or closed off. It's about balance. It's about giving from a full cup instead of scraping from the bottom. It's about showing up with your whole heart instead of half your soul. It's about choosing love without losing yourself in the process, because the most powerful thing you can offer the world is not your compliance. It's your authenticity. It's your passion. It's your clarity. It's your truth. And when those things lead your life, kindness becomes a choice, not an obligation. Love becomes an expression, not a transaction. You become someone who gives freely, not someone who gives because you're afraid of what happens if you stop. You're not here to be the world's emotional sponge. You're here to live boldly, to love deeply, to connect honestly, and to give in a way that doesn't destroy you. And the moment you stop confusing self-sacrifice with kindness, that's the moment your life begins to expand again. There's a moment in life when you have to face a truth most people spend years avoiding. You teach people how to treat you, not by what you say, but by what you tolerate, not by what you hope for, but by what you allow. Every time you let someone dismiss your feelings, every time you pretend something didn't hurt when it did, every time you swallow your truth just to keep the peace, you're sending a message. And whether you realize it or not, people listen to that message far more loudly than the words that come out of your mouth. It starts in subtle ways. Someone interrupts you while you're speaking, and you let it slide. Someone expects you to rearrange your entire day for their convenience, and you do it without question. Someone takes advantage of your kindness because they've learned you won't push back. And in your mind, you say, it's okay, I don't want to create conflict. But that small moment creates a pattern. That pattern becomes a habit, and that habit becomes your identity at least in their eyes. And here's the hard truth. People treat you based on the boundaries you enforce, not the ones you think about, not the ones you wish you had, but the ones you actually live by. You can tell yourself you're strong, but if you never say no, people will treat you like you have no boundaries. You can tell yourself you deserve respect, but if you accept disrespect, people will continue giving you what you accept, not what you deserve. Your energy, your time, your voice, these are signals. And people learn how to interact with you based on the signals you consistently send. And I want you to really hear this. Most people are not intentionally trying to hurt you. Most people are not waking up thinking, how can I take advantage of this person today? What happens instead is that humans respond to patterns. If someone learns that you never speak up, they'll assume you don't mind. If someone learns that you always fix things, they'll assume it's your role. If someone learns you always put yourself last, they won't even consider that you have needs of your own. Not out of malice, but out of conditioning. Conditioning you help reinforce. You might think, but I'm just being nice, and there's nothing wrong with being generous, patient, or understanding. But when you consistently put your comfort below someone else's, when you consistently allow behaviors that hurt you, you're not being nice. You're teaching people that this is the level of treatment you accept. And no matter how kind your intentions are, the result is that your silence becomes permission. Your tolerance becomes approval. Your willingness to endure becomes the blueprint for how others show up in your life. Think about the times when you felt taken for granted. You gave, you supported, you understood. Even when it cost you energy, sleep, peace, you showed up for people in ways you wish that he would show up for you. And yet somehow you still found yourself wondering why it felt so one-sided. But if you're honest with yourself, you'll see that many of those people had no idea you were longing for reciprocity because you never gave them evidence of your limits. You hid your needs behind a smile. You hid your frustration behind calmness. You hid your boundaries behind excuses like, it's fine, or don't worry about it, or the classic, I can handle it. Yes, you can handle, but that doesn't mean you should. When you teach people that you're always available, they'll stop checking if you're okay. When you teach people that you're fine with everything, they'll stop asking what you want. When you teach people that your time isn't valuable, they'll assume it isn't. And slowly, without meaning to, you create relationships where you're always giving, always fixing, always adjusting, and rarely receiving the same in return. But the beautiful thing is this: the moment you change your standards, you change the dynamic. People will always rise or fall to the level of behavior you accept. When you start communicating your truth, you'll watch some relationships transform. When you start saying no with confidence, you'll watch some people suddenly treat you with more respect. When you stop making excuses for others, you'll watch the quality of your connections shift. Not because the world changes, but because you do. And yes, there will be people who don't like the new version of you. the version who speaks up, the version who asks for what they need, the version who doesn't bend just to avoid discomfort. But don't mistake their discomfort for your wrongdoing. Their discomfort simply reveals that they benefited from the version of you with no boundaries. Let them be uncomfortable, let them adjust, or let them leave. Your peace is worth more than their approval. Teaching people how to treat you isn't about becoming confrontational. It's not about fighting, arguing, or demanding. It's about clarity, clear communication, clear expectations, clear boundaries. For the first time in your life, you stop prioritizing harmony at the expense of your own honesty. You stop sacrificing your needs for the sake of someone else's comfort. You stop shrinking just to fit into what someone else expects you to be. And the moment you do that, something powerful happens inside you. You begin to realize that respect starts with the way you respect yourself. Love starts with the way you love yourself. Boundaries start with the way you honor your own value. When you recognize your worth, you no longer negotiate it. When you understand your needs, you no longer apologize for them. When you realize you're allowed to take up space, you stop handing that space away to everyone else. You start showing up differently. You start walking differently. You start speaking differently. And people respond to that difference because people can feel when you value yourself and they adjust their behavior accordingly. You're not responsible for other people's reactions. You're responsible for teaching them how to treat you through the standards you live by. And when you finally stop tolerating the things that drain you, something incredible happens. You create room for relationships that match your heart, your values, your strength, and your truth. Because the moment you decide to raise your standards, your entire life begins to rise with them. There comes a point in your life where you realize that chasing approval is one of the fastest ways to lose yourself. You start to see that no matter how hard you try, no matter how perfect you attempt to be, there will always be someone who misunderstands you, someone who judges you, someone who projects their own insecurities onto you. And in the middle of trying to keep everyone happy, you forget something essential. Your authenticity is worth more than anyone's approval. Most people spend years editing themselves. They pick and choose which parts of their personality are acceptable, which emotions are safe, which dreams are practical, and which truths need to be hidden so they don't upset anyone. They shape shift depending on who's in front of them. They adapt their tone, their interests, their boundaries, their identity just to fit into whatever space they're standing in. And for a while it works. People like them, people praise them, people call them easy to be around. But deep down they feel this emptiness, this hollowness, because they know the affection they're getting isn't even for who they really are. It's for a version of themselves they curated. And when the affection you receive is for a mask you wear, it never feels like love. It feels like pressure. You start worrying, what happens if I stop playing this role? What if they see the parts of me I've been hiding? Will they still stay? Will they still respect me? Will they still care? That fear keeps you trapped in an identity that isn't yours. And the longer you stay in that identity, the harder it is to remember who you actually are. The reason authenticity is so terrifying is because it comes with risk. When you show your real thoughts, you risk disagreement. When you show your real feelings, you risk vulnerability. When you show your real self, you risk rejection. And we're wired to avoid pain, avoid conflict, avoid disapproval. So instead of being real, we try to be what we think people want. But the price of that performance is massive. You pay with your energy. You pay with your peace. You pay with your self-respect. Living for approval keeps you small. It keeps you silent. It keeps you scared. But authenticity liberates you. And liberation doesn't come from doing something dramatic. It comes from subtle shifts. It's the moment you say what you actually feel instead of what's easiest to hear. It's the moment you show up as yourself instead of adjusting your personality to match the room. It's the moment you stop apologizing for existing. It's the moment you realize your worth is not rooted in how many people like you, but in how deeply you honor your truth. Most people don't realize this, but the world responds differently to authenticity. When you're real, truly real, people feel it. They can sense the difference between someone who's performing and someone who's grounded in who they are. Authenticity creates connection. It creates respect. It creates impact. When you speak your truth without fear, people hear you differently. When you set boundaries without guilt, people treat you differently. When you live in alignment, people follow you differently. And when you stop chasing approval, something incredible happens. You start attracting people who appreciate you for the right reasons. Approval is conditional. Authenticity is magnetic. And here's something most people don't expect. The moment you stop trying to impress others, you actually become more impressive. You walk with more confidence. because you're not carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. You speak with more clarity because you're not filtering everything through the fear of judgment. You love more wholeheartedly because you're not constantly trying to earn affection. And that shift is powerful. It's the shift from surviving to living, from pleasing to expressing, from hiding to becoming. But let's be honest, authenticity isn't comfortable at first. It will challenge the relationships built on your compliance. It will disrupt the dynamics where you were expected to be quiet, gray, able, predictable. It will make some people uncomfortable, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're no longer feeding their expectations. Some people might distance themselves. Some might criticize you. Some might try to guilt you back into your old patterns. But that's the moment you get to decide. Will you go back to minimizing who you are, or will you keep stepping into the version of yourself that feels honest and alive? You don't grow by returning to the person you were. You grow by becoming the person you've been suppressing. The truth is, you don't need anyone's permission to be yourself. You don't need anyone's validation to trust your voice. You don't need anyone's approval to follow your path. The people who truly belong in your life aren't drawn to your perfection. They're drawn to your sincerity. They're drawn to the parts of you that are real, your quirks, your flaws, your opinions, your dreams, your truth. That's what creates real connection. And when you finally stop living for others and start living for yourself, you realize something profound. Authenticity doesn't push the right people away. It brings them closer, and it pushes away the ones who were never meant to be in your life in the first place. You don't have to be liked by everyone. You just have to be aligned with yourself, because the moment you choose authenticity over approval, that's the moment your real life begins to unfold. And it all starts with the courage to stop hiding and finally be who you were always meant to be. There comes a moment when you finally understand that the word no is not an attack, not a betrayal, not a rejection. It's a declaration of self-respect. It's the moment you realize that boundaries aren't walls meant to shut people out. They're doors meant to protect the energy, the peace, the identity that you've spent your entire life building. And yet so many people hesitate to set them because somewhere along the way, they were taught that honoring themselves makes them selfish. They were taught that putting their needs first makes them difficult. They were taught that saying no makes them unkind, but none of that is true. Boundaries are one of the purest expressions of love for yourself, and ironically, love for others. Because when you show people where you stand, you teach them how to connect with you in a healthier, more meaningful way. Boundaries are clarity. Boundaries are honesty. Boundaries are strength. Without them, your relationships become unbalanced, your energy becomes drained, and your identity becomes blurred to the point where you can barely see who you are anymore. Most people don't realize how often they're violating their own boundaries. They say yes when everything inside them is screaming no. They give time they don't have. They offer energy they can't spare. They sacrifice sleep, peace, health, even self-worth just so they don't disappoint someone else. And they convince themselves it's noble. They tell themselves they're just being supportive, flexible, understanding. But there's a fine line between being generous and being depleted, and too many people cross that line daily without even noticing. You can't pour from an empty cup, and yet people keep trying. They give and give and give until they're drained, burned out, frustrated, and resentful. Then they wonder why they feel unseen, why they feel unappreciated, why no one seems to care as much as they do. But it's because they taught others that their needs don't matter. They taught others that their time is always available. They taught others that their limits are negotiable, not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. And here's the part that hurts the most. They know exactly when someone else crosses a line, but they don't know how to speak up about it. There's a tension inside, a small voice whispering, this doesn't feel right, but fear overrides it every time. Fear of being disliked, fear of conflict, fear of losing someone, fear of being judged. And that fear becomes the cage they live in. But what if instead of fearing boundaries, you saw them as a safeguard for your soul? What if you realized that every time you protect your time, your emotional space, your mental health, you're actually elevating your entire life? Because here's the truth. People who value you will respect your boundaries. People who love you want you to be whole, not drained. People who are meant for your life will never require you to abandon yourself to keep them. You don't set boundaries to push people away. You set boundaries to hold yourself together. Imagine a life where you don't immediately apologize for things that aren't your fault. A life where you say no without drowning in guilt. A life where you don't explain yourself endlessly just to justify your decisions. A life where your peace is not up for negotiation. That's what boundaries give you. The space to breathe, to exist, to be fully yourself without constantly managing everyone else's comfort. And yes, people will react when you begin setting them. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you're difficult. But the truth is, you aren't changing at all. You're finally showing up as the version of you that should have been there from the start. What's really happening is that the people who were benefiting from your lack of boundaries are losing access to privileges they should have never had. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them adjust. Let them reveal their true colors. Boundaries don't break relationships. They reveal them. You're not responsible for how people respond to your truth. You're only responsible or honoring it. And I want you to feel this deeply. Saying no is not rejection. It's redirection. When you say no to what drains you, you say yes to what strengthens you. When you say no to chaos, you say yes to peace. When you say no to disrespect, you say yes to dignity. Every boundary you set is a choice to live a life aligned with who you are instead of who others expect you to be. But boundaries aren't just words, they're actions. You can't just set them, you have to enforce them. You can't say, I don't accept disrespect, and then stay in situations where disrespect is normal. You can't say, my time is valuable, and then constantly let people waste it. You can't say, I deserve love, and then continue accepting crumbs. A boundary is not a suggestion, it's a standard, and your standards determine the quality of your life. They determine the quality of your relationships. They determine how deeply you can love someone without losing yourself in the process. Because when you have strong boundaries, you're no longer loved for what you provide. You're loved for who you are. You're no longer valued for your compliance. You're valued for your clarity. And that kind of love is real. That kind of connection is real. That kind of life is real. You've spent too many years bending for people who wouldn't take a single step for you. You spent too many years apologizing for things that weren't wrong. You spent too many years giving people access to your life that they didn't earn. Now it's time to take your power back. Not by shutting down, not by becoming cold, but by honoring yourself with the same level of care, compassion, and loyalty that you've always shown others. Because the moment you stop treating your boundaries like optional suggestions and start treating them like non-negotiable truths, that's the moment your entire life transforms. There is a reason you feel so drained, so stretched thin, so overwhelmed, even when you're doing all the right things. There is a reason you can be surrounded by people, yet feel completely depleted inside. It's because your energy, your emotional, mental, and spiritual fuel is not infinite. And when you spend it everywhere except on yourself, you eventually run on fumes. You cannot live an empowered life when you are running on empty. And yet so many people convince themselves that exhaustion is normal, that burnout is just part of life, that feeling overwhelmed is something they should simply push through. But your energy is your life's fuel. It's the core of your strength. It's the source of your clarity, your creativity, your courage, your confidence. Without protecting it, everything else falls apart. Most people don't think about energy as a resource, but it is the most valuable one you have. You can get more money. You can get more opportunities. You can get more time by changing your habits. But you cannot replace the energy you've burned out through constant giving, constant pleasing, constant sacrifice. And the truth is, you often burn out not because of how much you're doing, but because of how much of what you're doing goes against your own alignment. When you try to meet everyone's expectations, when you try to be everything for everyone, when you try to carry weight that isn't yours, you drain yourself faster than you can refill. And the crazy thing is, energy leaks don't always come from big moments. Sometimes they come from the subtle, constant compromises that you make throughout the day. Saying yes when you want to say no. Taking responsibility for someone else's emotions. Staying silent to avoid an argument. Pretending something doesn't bother you when it absolutely does. These moments seem small, but they add up. One leak becomes 10 leaks. And before you know it, everything inside you is pouring out faster than you can replenish. And then you wonder why you wake up already tired. You wonder why your motivation disappears halfway through the day. You wonder why you feel numb, disconnected, or resentful. It's because you've trained yourself to prioritize everyone else's needs at the expense of your own internal stability. You've trained yourself to endure instead of recharge. You've trained yourself to push through instead of pause. You've trained yourself to pour into others even when your own cup has been empty for years. But here's the truth you need to hear. Protecting your energy is not selfish. It's essential. You can't be the best partner free, ND, leader, parent, or human when you're depleted. You can't show up with strength when you're exhausted. You can't give people your heart when you spend all day abandoning your own. Protecting your energy isn't about shutting the world out. It's about choosing what deserves access to you in the first place. There are people who uplift your energy, people who drain it, and people who don't even realize they're pulling from you because you've conditioned them to expect that you'll always be available. And it's not about cutting people off. It's about recognizing who you become around them. Do you shrink? Do you tense up? Do you walk on eggshells? Do you feel obligated, guilty, or responsible for their emotions? Those are signs that your energy is leaking, and you cannot blame people for taking what you continue to offer without limits. You have to take responsibility for the access you give. Think about how many times you forced yourself to show up when everything inside you was screaming for rest. Think about how many times you've agreed to something just to avoid disappointing someone. Think about how many times you've carried emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. Every one of those choices costs energy. And if you never stop to recharge, you begin to lose the parts of yourself that make life feel meaningful. Your passion, your joy, your spark, your clarity. But something powerful happens when you decide to protect your energy with intention. You start noticing what aligns with your spirit and what pulls you away from it. You start realizing that saying no doesn't close doors. It protects the ones that matter. You start discovering that silence isn't peace, it's suppression. And that real peace comes from honoring yourself, not avoiding discomfort. You start recognizing that your time is valuable, that your presence is valuable, that your focus is valuable, and that not everyone deserves full access to any of those things. And let's be honest, you can feel the difference instantly when something drains you versus when something fuels you. There are conversations that leave you lighter and ones that leave you heavier. There are environments where you breathe more freely and ones where you feel constricted the moment you walk in. There are people who ignite something in you and people who dim you slowly, subtly, consistently. Protecting your energy is about choosing consciously instead of unconsciously absorbing everything around you. You don't have to explain why you need space. You don't have to justify why you need rest. You don't have to defend your boundaries to anyone who benefits from you having none. You don't have to negotiate your peace with people who don't value it. You don't owe the world your exhaustion. You don't owe anyone access to you at the cost of your sanity. When you protect your energy, you start experiencing life differently. You think more clearly. You connect more deeply. You love more intentionally. You create from a place of fullness instead of survival. You become present instead of reactive. You become grounded instead of scattered. And the more you honor your energy, the more you begin attracting people, opportunities, and experiences that match it. And eventually you realize something extraordinary. Your energy isn't just something you manage. It's something you guard fiercely, something you invest wisely, something you use as a guide for what belongs in your life and what doesn't. Because the moment you understand that your energy is your power, you stop giving it away cheaply, and your entire life begins to transform. There comes a moment in every person's life when they look in the mirror and realize they no longer recognize the person staring back. Not because their face has changed. Not because years have passed, but because somewhere along the way they stopped living for themselves and started living for the approval, validation, and expectations of everyone else. It happens quietly, subtly, and slowly. You say yes a little too often. You stay quiet a little too long. You tolerate a little too much. And before you know it, you've drifted so far from your own identity that you can't even remember where the drift began. And the reason this happens so effortlessly is because you never pause long enough to ask yourself the most important question of all: who am I really? When no one is watching, no one is judging, and no one is demanding anything from me. Most people never take time for self-reflection because it feels uncomfortable. It forces you to confront truths you've been avoiding, patterns you've been repeating, and sacrifices you've been making without realizing the cost. But the truth is, you cannot reclaim yourself if you don't first take the time to understand yourself. You cannot rebuild your confidence, your boundaries, or your direction without first understanding the parts of you that have been buried under years of pleasing others. You can't move forward if you don't acknowledge what's been weighing you down. Self-reflection is not about judging yourself. It's about becoming aware. It's about being honest enough to say, this is working for me and this is not. It's about seeing your own behaviors clearly, noticing the patterns you fall into, and understanding why you react the way you do. And the moment you begin doing this, something profound happens. You start to take your power back. For the first time in a long time, you begin to hear your own voice again, not the voice shaped by others, but the voice that has always been yours. And that voice matters. It matters because your life is a reflection of the beliefs you hold out yourself. If you believe your needs are secondary, you'll always settle. If you believe you must keep everyone happy, you'll always shrink. If you believe conflict is dangerous, you'll always stay silent. But when you take the time to understand where those beliefs came from, your upbringing, your past relationships, the environments you've lived in, you begin to see that many of them were never really yours. They were inherited, absorbed, or learned for survival, not for fulfillment. And once you see that, you can finally choose differently. Self-reflection is the doorway to freedom, but maintaining a strong sense of self is what keeps that freedom alive. Because the truth is, the world will always pull at you. People will always have expectations. Life will always present pressures and demands. If you don't have a clear sense of who you are at your core, you'll be tossed around emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. You'll keep molding yourself to fit situations instead of shaping situations around who you are. You'll keep trying to earn love instead of embodying it. You'll keep chasing approval instead of trusting your own intuition. Maintaining a strong sense of self means knowing what you value, what you stand for, what you will accept, and what you won't tolerate. It means honoring your emotions without letting them control you. It means trusting your inner guidance even when other people don't understand your decisions. It means being willing to disappoint others rather than betray yourself. When you have that inner stability, you stop being reactive and start being intentional. You stop trying to adapt to everyone else's energy and start choosing the energy you want to carry. But understand this, maintaining a strong sense of self is not something you do once. It's a daily practice. It's saying no when your body tightens and your intuition whispers, shh, that something doesn't feel right. It's choosing rest, even when guilt tries to convince you that stopping is lazy. It's speaking up even when your voice shakes. It's pausing long enough to ask yourself if the life you're living feels like yours or someone else's design. It's catching yourself in moments when you slip back into old patterns and gently redirecting yourself toward who you want to be. And part of maintaining that strong inner anchor is allowing yourself to evolve. You are not meant to remain the same. You will outgrow people, phases, environments, and versions of yourself, and that is not a failure. It's a signal that you are becoming more aligned. But if you don't regularly check in with yourself, you won't notice when you've outgrown something. You'll stay in places that no longer fit. You'll keep giving energy to relationships that no longer nourish you. You'll keep forcing yourself into roles that feel suffocating. Reflection gives you the courage to release what is no longer serving you, while a strong sense of self gives you the strength to step into what does. And here's the beautiful part. When you begin to understand yourself deeply, you become unshakable. Your worth is no longer determined by who approves of you. Your peace is no longer controlled by who accepts you. Your identity is no longer shaped by who needs you. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. You stop trying to be what the world wants and start becoming who you're truly meant to be. People will notice the shift. Some will respect it. Some won't. Some will fall away because your growth disrupts the version of you they were comfortable with. And that's okay. The people meant for your future won't be threatened by your authenticity. They'll be drawn to it. And you won't fear that loss anymore because you'll no longer be losing yourself to keep others close. You'll know who you are, and that knowing becomes your anchor, your compass, your power. When you reflect, when you reconnect with your truth, when you commit to honoring yourself daily, you reclaim something you may have forgotten you ever had, your identity, not the identity shaped by fear, guilt, or expectations, the identity shaped by truth. And once you reclaim that, your life begins to shift in ways that feel real, aligned, and deeply yours. Because the moment you know yourself fully, you stop accepting anything that asks you to become less. There comes a point in your life when you realize that the very thing holding you back is not the world, not other people, not your past. It's the belief system you've been carrying for years without ever challenging it. And these beliefs didn't come out of nowhere. They were shaped by experiences, by moments of pain, by childhood messages, by relationships that taught you to shrink, by environments that rewarded silence, by situations that made you feel like the safest thing you could do was disappear into kindness and hope it would be enough. But beliefs are powerful. They're invisible, yet they shape everything. They influence how you react, how you communicate, how you love, how you trust, how you protect yourself, and especially how you value yourself. And the reason so many people lose themselves trying to be nice is because they never question the beliefs that taught them that niceness equals worthiness, that pleasing equals acceptance, that self-sacrifice equals love. They're living inside a script that was written for them, not by them. And until you challenge that script, you will keep repeating the same patterns, no matter how much you want to change. Think about how many decisions in your life have been made from automatic beliefs you never even paused to examine. Beliefs like, if I say no, they'll be disappointed. Or if I speak up, I'll create conflict. Or if I take care of myself first, I'm being selfish. Or if I ask for what I need, I'm a burden. These thoughts don't appear because they're true. They appear because they're familiar. They've been repeated so many times that they feel like facts. But they're not facts. They're stories. Stories that started long before you even realized they were shaping your identity. The moment you start challenging those beliefs, your entire world begins to shift. You start to see that not everyone will leave if you say no. Not every disagreement will destroy a relationship. Not every boundary is an act of rebellion. Not every need is an inconvenience. You realize that the beliefs you've held on to for years were never designed to help you thrive. They were designed to help you cope. And coping is not the same as living. But here's what people don't understand. Challenging your beliefs doesn't feel comfortable at first. It feels like stepping outside of a cage that you've lived in for so long you forgot there was an outside. It feels like telling yourself the truth even when your old conditioning tries to pull you back into familiar patterns. It feels like learning a new language, the language of boundaries, the language of confidence, the language of self-respect. And anytime you learn something new, there will be resistance. That resistance isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're breaking free. And the most important belief you must challenge is the belief that you don't deserve more, because deep down, that's what keeps people stuck the most. They want more, they crave more, they dream of more, but they don't believe they're worthy. They don't believe they deserve peace, rest, respect, reciprocity, honesty, love that doesn't drain them, relationships that don't require self-betrayal. They settle for scraps because somewhere along the way they learned that asking for more made them difficult, demanding, or too much. But you are not too much. You've simply been giving too much to environments that gave too little in return. When you begin challenging those beliefs, you start rewriting the way you show up in the world. You start speaking differently. You start choosing differently. You start carrying yourself differently. You begin to say things like, my needs matter. You begin to think things like, I'm allowed to take up space. You begin to believe things like, I don't need to earn love by sacrificing myself. And those new beliefs slowly dismantle the old ones that kept you small. And the shift doesn't just happen inside you. It happens in your relationships, your career, your goals, your habits. You stop tolerating disrespect, not because you're angry, but because you're awake. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop explaining your boundaries like you're doing something wrong. You stop shrinking just to make other people feel comfortable. You stop abandoning yourself just to avoid being misunderstood. The world responds differently to a person who knows they deserve more. Opportunities align differently. People treat you differently. Your entire energy shifts because when you challenge your old beliefs, you reclaim ownership of your life. You stop letting the past dictate your future. You stop letting fear dictate your choices. You stop letting guilt dictate your behavior. You stop letting old wounds dictate your worth. And that's the key. Your beliefs determine what you think you're worthy of. And what you think you're worthy of determines what you accept. When you raise your standard of what you believe you deserve, everything in your life begins to reflect that new standard. This is why challenging your beliefs is the final key to stop losing yourself. Because as long as you carry the belief that being nice is your identity, you will continue to lose pieces of yourself, trying to maintain an image that only keeps you exhausted. As long as you believe that conflict is dangerous, you will silence yourself into resentment. As long as you believe that your needs are inconvenient, you will never feel fulfilled. As long as you believe that love must be earned through sacrifice, you will keep attracting people who take advantage of it. But the moment you challenge those beliefs, you begin to rebuild a life based on truth instead of fear. You begin to see yourself clearly again. You begin to understand that worthiness is not something you earn, it's something you own. You begin to realize that the world doesn't get to decide who you are, you do. And when you finally reclaim that power, you stop asking, how can I be what they need? And start asking, how can I become who I was meant to be? Because the second you rewrite the beliefs that once held you captive, you stop losing yourself forever.